What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mini Cooper S R56. Today on the Mini behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your rear brakes. In front of us, we have one of the many kits available on fcpo.com, which includes Zimmermann rotors, Akebono pads, and the ball wear sensor, as well as the rotor set screws. You'll notice we have a couple anti-rattle clips or shims here on the table as well. Those are included with the Akebono pads. Every manufacturer will include something a little bit different. Sometimes you'll get the anti-rattle clips. Sometimes you'll get the 13mm bolts for the caliper guide pins. It all depends on what exactly you need, but this is going to be most of what you're going to need, with the exception of those 13 mils, which you can reuse if you clean them up and do a little bit of thread lock around them. Typically, you want to take a look at your brakes if you're considering doing them. Maybe your sensor hasn't gone off just yet, but they're getting a little cruddy looking, they're a little bit rusty, pads are getting low. Anything less than 2 millimeters, you want to replace them. There are special gauges available, which we also sell, to measure your pad thickness, especially if you do brakes quite often. On top of that, you want to look at the brake disc, see if there's a lip developing on the inboard or outboard side of the rotor. If there is, then more than likely you're due for a replacement. And in extreme circumstances, the rears, just like the fronts, can also warp and cause some funky business when you're coming down to a hard stop. Even though we're going to be working on a S model behind me today, this is going to be the same process for your non-S cars as well. So for you R56 owners with the N12 Mini, same process. Parts are a little bit different in size, but the torque specs and all that good stuff remains the same. Before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, my good people, we're going to be using a 17, a 16, a 13, and a specialty T50. That'll be our specialty socket for today. Along with that, we have both 1/2-inch drive and 3/8 drive ratchets, as well as torque wrenches to accompany those sockets. We have a 15mm thin wrench, which will be handy for the counterhold on the guide pins. However, you can use a small set of needle nose pliers or maybe some needle nose vice grips. We have a caliper hook. A small flathead screwdriver is always handy whenever doing brakes. We're using Astro 78618. This is a universal toolkit which has a ton of different discs and attachments inside of it to help you retract usually rear caliper pistons. This is going to have kind of a setup if you're familiar with an Audi or Volkswagen, where you have to spin in the piston in the rear, so that tool is going to make it nice and easy. Sometimes you can use just a small set of pliers if you don't have that tool, so just keep that in mind. They're not usually too tough to spin in. We have some electric impact and electric ratchet tools to help speed up the process. We have some brake cleaner and some liquid moly ceramic paste, which we use for pretty much every single brake job video. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we're going to be working on the rear right side of the Mini. However, the steps are going to be pretty much identical for both the driver's side and passenger side, with the exception of the brake pad wear sensor, which is located on this side, which is why we're going to be showcasing over here. We have 4 17mm lug bolts to get started. For those of you not using an impact gun, break these lug bolts free with the vehicle on the ground first. Just crack them free, then you can lift up the car and remove them the rest of the way. In addition to that, make sure that your parking brake is off. Make sure that your wheel can spin freely. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time taking these brakes off. So 17, let's get these off. Now we have our wheel off, we have a better view of the caliper itself. First thing we want to do before we even go ahead and take the caliper or the carrier bracket off, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to get this set screw off. If that set screw does not come off, then this whole job is wasted. So you can do it one of two ways. You can live a little bit wild, put your T50 on an impact and blast it off, which may be what I do. We'll wait and see. The other alternative is, if your parking brake works, we'll go ahead and put the parking brake on and use that to keep the disc from spinning, and then go ahead and crack it free with your ratchet and bit. Third thing you can do is, if your parking brake does not work, you can go ahead and thread in some lug bolts. And then, pretending this was a large breaker bar, you can counter hold here. Obviously place these away from the set screw, but you can counter hold the whole disc assembly with a breaker bar like so, and you can crack free your set screw. So it's just one of the few ways that you can do all of this good stuff, my good people. For me today, we're just going to go ahead and spin the wheel of luck, hit it with the impact. Perfect. All right, so now we know that our setsu is going to come off. Before we go ahead and take off the caliper, the next thing we're going to address on the rear right passenger side only is going to be the brake pad wear sensor, which those of you with an eagle eye will see that it is not sitting in its correct home. And that's because someone went ahead and zip tied this off to the side, up the upper control arm. So I'm going to clean that up real quick, get all these zip ties off, simulate it being in place, and then we're going to work on replacing it just to show you the proper routing. So give me 1 second while I undo some of this hackery, and then we'll get to it. So my good people, this is what this should look like. The sensor should be clipped into the inboard pad, which this one's completely destroyed, which would explain the brake light on the dash. Usually you have a little dust cap for the bleeder valve that can go ahead and be popped open. You can pull the sensor cable out of there. And then following the back of the strut assembly, these brake pad wear sensors have these little rubber grommets that allow it to clip onto other things, like in this case, the ABS cable. So we're going to go ahead and just pop it off of that, follow this cable back, and then typically you're going to have a little metal clip on the trailing arm that holds some of these lines in place. You can just pop it out, either take the clip with it, and then take the clip off and set it back on the arm, depending on which one's easier. In this case, it's a little loose fitting. So we're going to take it, the metal clip off, slide the brake pad wear sensor out, and then we can put our clip back on. There we go. And now we can follow the sensor up in here into the wheel well where it connects to the little connector. Then you can see this one is held in with a zip tie. We're gonna go ahead and snip that zip tie. We can replace it after the fact. And then typically these little white connectors, same like the blue one, are clipped in towards the back. There's a little white plastic clip that holds them in. This one was pretty loose, so I'm sure it's lived a tough life seeing as how the sensor was broken. But they have a tab that you can release, which is going to be a little bit tight to see. But if you've ever done brakes on any BMW, it's pretty standard. You have one little tab at the top, and you just push it in, and you can release the sensor. All right, here's our old sensor. You'll see that the inside of them are keyed. They only go in one way into the connector. So we're going to go ahead and plug our new one in now, just route it up to the brake caliper, and let it hang out while we do the rest of the brake job. Now we're going to go ahead and connect our brake sensor, our wear pad sensor. So again, I'm going to try to grab it, line up which way it's going to go. I can't really see while I'm working in here, but we're going to go ahead and do our best to line these two up. There we go. You want to let them clip in to each other. There we go. And now, if possible, we can feed the white junction to the left of the blue one back into the little clips that hold it in. Sometimes you need to come in from above and then slide it down. I'm going to pop it back into our metal clip that's coming off the tab here on the trailing arm. Feed that over the top. We're going to find our ABS cable once more. Use the little built-in grommets to the sensor to kind of hold it up. Bring it over, and then we're just going to let this hang out here while we work on the rest of the brakes. So with that, two 13mm bolts. Let's go ahead and get this caliper off. And we're going to use a socket. You can also use a wrench, whichever you prefer. I'm going to break this 13 free. Sometimes you may need to counter hold the pin with a 15mm wrench, a thin set of pliers or needle nose. I have a 15mm thin wrench, which is the best, in my opinion, to get these held back. But if you're going to be reusing this hardware, you can see there's already some thread locker on there. Just give it a good wire wheel and put some fresh thread locker on there. Some medium strength will do you just fine. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on the bottom. All right, and now with this, we can go ahead and swing the rear brake caliper off. Now we're going to go ahead, because this still has the parking brake attached to it, it does a pretty good job at suspending the caliper. These are incredibly light. You're really not going to hurt anything by letting it sit like this. We're going to go ahead and pop these old pads off. We can also pop these old clips off. We have new ones supplied with the Akebono pads. Small flathead screwdriver to just pop off the clips if they're not coming off easily. It's also a good time to give them just a little bit of a scrape if there's any buildup or crud that you want to get off of them. A wire wheel will also work great in this case, but because the pads don't actually ride directly on the carrier, but instead on the metal clips, you don't have to worry about them too much. This is also a great time to inspect the pins to make sure they're not bound up or seized. These are in great shape, so we're gonna go ahead and let them be. So now we need to work on getting our piston to go back in. So I'm seeing what plate is gonna work out of our Astro set. Plate E is gonna be the trick here. Now we can set this baby up. The piston should go in nice and easy. If it doesn't, you're gonna have either a problem with the seal inside, a corroded piston, or a collapsed soft line. So just some things to be mindful of when doing brakes on any car. This piston should always go in nice and easy. And if they don't, then it's time to diagnose and see what the problem can be. All right, at this point, our tool has bottomed out. So we're gonna go ahead and loosen up our backing plate, get that off, and there we have a nice and compressed piston. Now at this point, what we can do is just let this hang off to the side, but so we're not so mean to the soft line, even though it really doesn't have any tension on it. We'll take our caliper hook, just swing it through one of those holes, and we'll tie it up off of the upper control arm. So now there's no tension on the soft line at all. All right, so now we have our caliper hung off to the side. The next step would be to get the caliper carrier bracket off, but I have a theory that this disc will come off without removing the carrier bracket, since the parking brake is built into the caliper and not inside the hub. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this T50 off the rest of the way and see if we can squeeze it out so that we don't have to remove the carrier bracket. Survey says no problem, my good people. That's gonna be nice, easy news. The other good thing about doing it this way is that you don't, take off the bracket. Mini does recommend you replace the caliper carrier bracket bolts, even though they are not torque to yield. They do say you change them every time you do a brake job. So if you are taking them off, or maybe you already took the bracket off, then that will be linked in the description below. But this is a nice little cheat just to do the brakes a little bit easier. Let's clean up this hub a little bit, get some of that old surface rust off of them. Now we're not going to go too wild on this car. We're going to be taking it apart again to do some other videos. So in a different world, we would be going ham with the wire wheel here, but this is a great time if you have a lot of corrosion to take the wire wheel tool out, emery cloth, wire brush, whatever you have. Just give this a good scrub, get any loose rust or debris off. In this case, these are in pretty decent shape considering. Now we can go ahead and get our ceramic paste locked and loaded. Now, even though Zimmerman doesn't require any paste of any kind behind their zinc coated discs, the fact is that we live in New England, this car will see snow and salt, and this will eventually corrode onto the surface of the hub. So anything we can do to help its longevity and make it easier for the next person that does this brake job again, it's definitely not gonna hurt. So always a plus in my book. This is a point where I tell you to keep your hands nice and clean so you can handle your new Zimmerman discs without getting them all gummy. Because they are zinc coated, you don't want to hit that surface with brake clean, and otherwise you're going to deteriorate the surface. It's not like a standard old traditional raw disc that comes a little bit oiled so they don't corrode. These are quite the opposite. They will not corrode, so you don't want to get them dirty and hit them with brake clean. So now gently we're going to feed our brake disc in. Again, being mindful of the surface. We have just enough room to tuck that in. I'm going to line up our set screw hole. And if you're neurotic like I am, I like to do a little bit of paste on the seat where the set screw is going to sit. That way the set screw doesn't seize itself to the disc rotor. Now we can get our new T50 fed in. The torque spec for this T50 is going to be 27 Newton meters, but we're just going to go ahead and snug it up gently with the ratchet. So in our case, you can see I'm struggling a bit to get this in, and that is because this hub is pretty jank. The threads for the lug bolts are a little bit cross-eyed, and the ones for the set screw are also no bueno. So as you can guess, we're going to be doing wheel bearings. So for now, we're gonna not worry about this too much. Once we get some better hubs on the car, we'll be replacing the hardware again, but 27 Newton meters for your T50, my good people. We're gonna move on to some brake pads. So let's do that now. Now we're gonna install the clips for the pads. These have little tabs on the inboard side of them that help align them basically on either side of the brake disc. So they really only go on one way. I'm gonna get them fed over, pop those babies in, just like that. Wonderful. Now we're gonna take our brake pads. And for these, there is an inboard and outboard pad. The inboard pad has a hump built into it and a notch for the brake pad wear sensor. So that's gonna go on the inside. I like to use a little bit of the liquid moly ceramic paste on the ears where they ride inside the clips, just so that they don't get seized to the clips and they can move freely, so that when you're on the pedal, they'll do their job nice and evenly. When you let off the pedal, they can kind of float back. Just, hang loose until they're needed again. It's not an art project. We don't need to coat the whole freaking backside or anything like that. And do the same thing on the outboard pad. You'll notice this one has a flat top, no notch for the brake pad wear sensor. We're going to key that in. Boom, baby. Now with that, we can swing over the brake caliper once more. Make sure to take your hook off. Don't leave that behind. Just slide that baby on. We'll take our cleaned up 13mm bolts, get those started. A little bit of thread locker on them. Medium strength is all you need. These we're going to snug down slowly with the electric ratchet, and then we're going to torque them down to 35 Newton meters. All right, with those two situated, my good people, now we can drive over the brake pad wear sensor. We're going to feed that again into the inboard pad. There's a special notch cut out just for this. It's going to be a little bit of a snug fit. Make sure it goes in all the way. If it falls out easy, just like this one did, then it's not in properly. All right, with that sensor in place, we can bring it out back over by the bleeder cap, or the little bleeder valve, and we'll use the cap to snug it down. And with that nice and situated, now we can just go ahead and put our wheel back on and wrap up this DIY. Now, my good people, the wheel goes back on. You know the drill. We're going to start the lug bolts by hand. Again, this hub is not in the best of shape, which is why this car will be getting new wheel bearings, so be sure to stay tuned for that DIY. But with that, we're going to get the lug bolts started by hand first. This is how you avoid ruining your wheel hubs and your lug bolts. If you just go ahead and just zap them in, you have a greater chance of cross-threading the bolts, and then nobody is going to have a good time. All right, let's get this baby on the ground. With the car on the ground, we're going to torque these lug bolts to 140 Newton meters, doing them in a semi-crisscross pattern. It's a little bit harder with the 4 lug. All right, my good people. And with that, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a really easy and straightforward job on the R56 chassis. Definitely a friendly do-it-yourself at-home job on the garage floor or the driveway. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, specifically on this chassis, then please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.